Hello, I'm Tracy Orwig, a licensed clinical social worker in the Kimmel Cancer Center at Johns Hopkins and a member of the Harry J. Duffey Patient and Family Services Program staff. On behalf of the Kimmel Cancer Center at Johns Hopkins, I'm pleased to welcome you to our 8th Annual Cancer Survivorship Conference, Session 3, Meditation, Your Tool for Relaxation. We have an exciting series of workshops planned for you. They will be held on each of the Thursdays in October from 12 to 12:45 p.m. These events are offered to you through the generosity of the Harry J. Duffey family, for which we thank them. Some details about this virtual workshop. You may offer a question or comment through the Q&A button, although given that we have almost 200 registered for today's session, we may not be able to specifically answer each one. However, knowing our speaker, I'm confident that she will do her best to address your questions. At this time, please help me welcome Dr. Neda Gould, Associate Director of the Johns Hopkins Bayview Medical Center Anxiety Disorders Clinic. In addition to treating patients with anxiety and depression, one of her primary areas of interest is teaching mindfulness-based stress reduction, or MBSR, and other mindfulness programs to patients, faculty, and staff. Thank you, Dr. Gould, for sharing your time with us today and helping us discover new ways to find relaxation.
Thank you so much, Tracy. It is a pleasure to be here. I am going to spend a little bit of time sharing my screen and going through some slides, and then I'm going to guide you through a meditation practice and then leave some time for questions and answers. So let me share my screen. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see that. So there are different types of meditation, and today I'm going to talk to you about one that I'm most familiar with, that I use in my clinical work and have studied over the years, and that is called mindfulness meditation. So you might have heard this term before. What is mindfulness meditation? And you probably see it written on the covers of magazines in the grocery store or elsewhere. It's become a very popular term. Mindfulness or mindfulness meditation is basically paying attention to the present moment without judgment. So we're bringing our attention intentionally to some aspect of the present moment and just being curious about it without judging it as good or bad, but just being open to whatever our experience is. Much of the time we are in autopilot, which is the opposite of being mindful. So these are times when we're mindless. Common examples are when we're driving, perhaps eating, walking. All of these daily activities we tend to do on automatic pilot. And what does that mean? It means that we're engaged in the activity, but our mind is often elsewhere. We're just going through the motions. And you may be able to think of your own examples. The issue with this is that we tend to miss out on the experiences we're engaged in, and sometimes there are pleasant moments that we miss out on. But also during moments of difficulty, if we try to avoid them, we don't have the opportunity to build resilience that comes with being able to confront and work with challenging experiences. So automatic pilot, while we all practice it, is not the most effective way to build resilience and also to build mindfulness and mindful awareness. Take a moment to think about what might keep you from living in the present moment. So when these lectures I give are live, of course I have participant feedback, but it's a little bit trickier on Zoom. But take a moment to think about what takes you away from the present moment. Some common examples, thinking, So we have, as humans, the ability to think into the future, think into the past, and think about our to-do list, worries, stories, and all of these things take us away from the present moment. Most often our thoughts are not about the activity we're engaged in the moment. Multitasking, which we think we're great at, but the research actually shows that we're not great multitaskers, and we don't enjoy the tasks we're doing as much as we otherwise would if we were just engaged in one task. Of course, our cell phones and technology instantly take us away from the present moment. And I added COVID and all of the distress and anxiety around COVID as something else that takes us away from the present. So when can we practice mindfulness? When can we bring ourselves back to the present moment? In theory, in every moment. So there's formal mindfulness practice, and that is when we use some sort of anchor to bring our attention to the present moment. It's, for example, the breath is a popular one. We're going to do a formal mindfulness, meditation practice at the end of this lecture, so you'll get a sense of what that is. Informally, though, we can bring mindfulness to every activity that we're engaged in. We notice when we're on autopilot, and we gently bring our attention to the present moment and what we're doing. You can think of these as a muscle that needs to be built. So needs to be strengthened. So formal mindfulness and informal, both of those things help build our ability to be in the present moment. There are some common misconceptions or myths about what mindfulness is. Many people say, oh, I can't practice mindfulness because I can't empty my mind of thoughts. And the lovely thing about mindfulness is that you don't have to empty your mind of thoughts. You notice thoughts without having to believe them, without having to react to them. We get a little bit of distance from the thoughts if we can begin to notice them without getting sucked into them. I should feel relaxed afterwards. I like to make the distinction between mindfulness and relaxation. So if you do something relaxing, which I hope that you have the opportunity to do periodically, maybe take a warm bath or go for a nice walk and your intention is to relax, that we would call a relaxation activity. Mindfulness, we're turning towards our experiences, and we may or may not feel relaxed in the moment as a result. Sometimes we're turning towards painful experiences, and that certainly isn't relaxing. It turns out, though, that in the long term, if we can continue to turn towards our experiences and be with them, that a byproduct tends to be relaxation. Part of the reason for this is that we expend a lot of energy pushing away experiences we don't like and resisting them. And with mindfulness, we're welcoming them, so to speak, even if they're unpleasant. And this in the moment isn't particularly relaxing, but in the long term, what we find is that it does lead to greater relaxation. I'm too busy to practice. I'll be less productive if I'm focused on the present moment. These are common misconceptions. It turns out that if we're able to take time to practice meditation, even if we take time out of our day, that we're more productive and we enjoy the tasks we're engaged in to a greater degree. So I've talked a little bit about why practicing mindfulness is important. Let's kind of delve into the science a little bit more. So the mindfulness meditation has become a really growing area of research. And it's expand across different diagnoses in physical and psychological health issues, and different programs have been applied to these various ailments. One of the most popular programs is called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, and I'll mention that in a greater detail in a moment. What the research has shown is that the most robust findings across clinical and non-clinical populations, we see decreases in stress, anxiety, depression, and in pain, decreased pain severity, decreased disability associated with pain, increased pain acceptance. We also see changes in brain structure and function, which I'll discuss in the next slides. And it also affects these various other components of our physical well-being. So in some studies, we decrease blood pressure, improved immune function, and even improvements in digestive and metabolic systems. Give me 1 second. I hear my kids in the background and it's distracting, and I'm just going to send my husband a text in the other room and ask him to quiet them down. During COVID, the mindfulness certainly has been a tool I've had to use more often than usual. So with all of the issues coming up in news and everything going on in the house and all the changes, it's certainly been something I've had to embody and implement. So I'm hoping that it's a tool that you can add to your toolbox, as well as during times of stress and just during daily activities. So this is a picture of the brain from the side. So the parts, if you can see my arrow over here, are the frontal lobes. So your eyes would be under there. That's your forehead. And so it's as if we took a slice of the brain. And I've highlighted in red the parts of the brain that we know are involved in meditation practices. So you don't have to know the terms, but basically the frontal lobes are involved in our higher ordered thinking or executive functioning. The cingulate cortex involved in emotional regulation. The insula is involved in self-awareness and perception. And then this little structure, the amygdala, is involved in processing our emotions and what we call the fight or flight, or the human stress response. We used to think that to get some of the benefits of mindfulness practice, you had to be a long-term meditator, so a monk or a nun. And we do know from imaging research that their brains are different than our brains, the people who aren't long-term meditators. And those differences, going back to this slide, are they have greater volume in some parts of the brain, such as the frontal lobes, and less activity in some parts of the brain, such as those involved in the fight or flight response. It turns out, though, that more recent research has shown that even after 8 weeks of some of these programs, such as the Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction Program, we see similar changes as those that we would see in long-term meditators. And some of those changes in the brain, I've kind of put into a chart here. They are increased activity and connectivity in the prefrontal cortex, again, the executive functioning part of our brain, the frontal lobes. We see changes in increased activity and even increased volume in the parts of the brain involved in memory formation, the hippocampus, as well as increased activity, connectivity, and volume in these various other regions involved in self-awareness, perception, emotional regulation. And really interestingly, less activity in the part of the brain involved in emotional processing, amygdala, or that fight or flight response. So that when we are confronted with a stressor, that part of the brain doesn't light up quite as much if it doesn't need to, if there's not an actual threat, and it turns off more readily if we are confronted with a threat that's resolved. So the human stress response is actually very important to keep us safe and protect us from danger. It gets us mobilized to make good decisions, but also for us nowadays, it turns on a lot more frequently than it needs to turn on. So you might notice that just by having a specific thought about what could happen in the future, the stress response can turn on. And those are instances where there's not actual threat or danger, and we can use mindfulness tools to come back to the present moment and turn off the stress response. I did find several reviews that looked at the research for individuals who have had cancer survivors or are active cancer patients, and looked at mindfulness-based interventions for these groups. So a systematic review and a meta-analysis basically pools all the studies together to see what the findings show. And these two studies that I came across found similar things, that basically compared to control groups, a group that's not having the mindfulness-based intervention, the mindfulness-based groups showed improvements in things such as the anxiety and depression and pain, which I mentioned are pretty consistent, as well as improvements in fatigue, fear of cancer recurrence, post-traumatic growth from the experience, and other kind of psychological distress factors, which is all great news. Now, it doesn't mean that if someone takes this program, they will definitely have those improvements, but when we pool people together, we see that there is a likelihood compared to a control condition that people will see those improvements. There are different mindfulness-based programs. So one of the, let me see if I have it on this slide. Yes. One of the most popular ones is called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. And this is an 8-week course where we meet for 2.5 hours each week, and then a full day silent retreat. And then there are home practices with guided meditations. It's based on this book called Full Catastrophe Living, and you can get that from the library, or you can get it on digitally as well to read. This is a course that I do teach at Hopkins for patients as well as for faculty and staff. Since COVID has started, I have not started a new course because it would have to be virtual, and I'm just trying to figure out how to figure this out in terms of a virtual course, because 2.5 hours certainly is a long time to be on the computer and can be a source of distress in and of itself. So, so more to come there. I'm hoping to truncate them and maybe begin a session in the winter. And so if that's something that interests you, please feel free. I think in the last slide I have my email. Otherwise, I'm happy to share it in the chat box, and you can email me, or I can leave our clinic number and I can give you more details about when our next course begins. In the MBSR program, the Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction program, we do a variety of meditations: breathing meditation, guided sitting meditation, body scans, gentle, very, very gentle standing and lying down yoga or stretching, and then how to bring mindfulness to daily life and eating and communications, walking meditations, and then, as I mentioned, the full day silent retreat. Let's talk a little bit about how you can bring mindfulness to your daily life. So say you don't have an interest in sitting and meditating every day. I hope you'll give it a try, but if not, there are still ways that you can just bring mindfulness to daily life. The first and probably simplest to remember is just at any point to pause and to take 3 breaths. So this is a way just to reset the system, reset the stress response. Just pause and take a few deep breaths. Bring attention to your senses. So our senses always reside in the present moment. And so you can always just pause and notice your senses when you're back in the present. Pausing before transitioning to a new task, pausing before picking up your phone, So this pause is really important. When we pause, we have an opportunity to pull ourselves out of automatic pilot and into a more aware and present mode. And so we don't react in situations, we tend to respond with greater wisdom and clarity. Label your emotion. So as psychologists, we have a saying, if you can name it, you can tame it. So even if your emotion is negative or unpleasant, feeling sad or anxious, if you can label it, you begin to get a little bit of distance from it, and it begins to mitigate the intensity of the emotion. Catching yourself when you're on autopilot and having some sort of reminder to come back to the present moment. One of my favorite tools is to drop the story. So when you are confronted with a stressful experience, state the facts of that event in a sentence. For example, I'm running late for an appointment. Notice all the add-on thoughts that take you away from the facts. What if I don't make it? What if they cancel my appointment? When will I be able to reschedule a new one? All of those add-on thoughts that make that situation even more stressful. And then come back to the facts. I am running late. And so you can see how one is easier to work with than all of those add-on thoughts. As I mentioned, yes, here's my email. So as I mentioned, I will have some variation of this course in the winter, and you are welcome to email me and I'll put you on my list. The way it works is that you have to have a new evaluation with me and become a patient in my clinic. That's the only way I can bill your insurance so that you don't have to pay out of pocket for this program. But I'm happy to speak further about that if that's something that's of interest. I do run daily mindfulness sessions that are free and open to the community. You're welcome to attend these whenever your schedule permits. I've been running these since COVID started. They're once a day for 30 minutes, and here is the Zoom link. And I believe Tracy will make these slides available so that you have all of this information. So let's take a few minutes to practice, and then we will shift into the question and answer period. So go ahead and just find a comfortable position for yourself. One in which you feel alert and awake, and also comfortable to the extent possible and relaxed. You don't have to do anything special. You can gently close your eyes if you'd like. And see if you can set an intention to stay awake for this practice, as we do tend to get a little bit sleepy. And let's take some deep breaths together to begin. Drawing a deep breath in, and then a long, slow exhalation. And then another deep breath in. And a long, slow exhalation. And one more time, deep breath in. And then exhaling and letting go. Letting go of where you were earlier today. Letting go of where you may need to be later today. And for these brief moments, just bringing your attention right here, right now. And you can go ahead and return your breathing back to its normal rhythm. Let's take a moment to notice sounds around us. Without judging them as good or bad, just see if you can notice the landscape of sounds around you. When the mind wanders away, and it definitely will, just gently come back to sounds. Now let's shift to the body as a whole. Just take a moment to notice how the body feels in this moment in general. Are you feeling tense or relaxed, comfortable or uncomfortable, tired or energized? Again, without judgment, there's no particular way to feel. We're just noticing what's here. Also checking in with how you're feeling emotionally. Just gently asking yourself, how am I feeling right now? And again, being open to whatever the answer is, as if you're listening to a friend. How am I feeling right now? And now gently returning your attention back to your breath. Noticing the breath at the tip of the nostrils as you inhale, at the tip of the nostrils as you exhale. The slightly cooler air on the in-breath, and the slightly warmer air as you exhale. Noticing the breath at the back of the throat and the rising and falling of the belly. Just this moment, just this breath. Just this moment, just this breath. And with this next breath cycle, seeing if you can be present with the breath from the beginning of the in-breath through the middle to the end of the out-breath. And you can slowly open your eyes. Take a moment to stretch out. And if you've never meditated before or practiced mindfulness, congratulations. That was an example of what you may experience. So that was everything that I wanted to share. So I think we can turn it over to answering some questions and answers. Answering some questions, rather, the Q&A. And I see some questions that have been added into the queue, and I'll go ahead and answer those. I'll read them and I'll answer them. So, can a person of any religious preference practice meditation and mindfulness? That's a great question. So, yes, the mindfulness practices, as they are taught here and as I teach them, as they're taught in the United States generally, and as I teach them, are secular. So it's basically bringing attention to the present moment. And anyone of any religious or spiritual practice can use them. They are rooted in Eastern traditions, but the concept has been secularized and brought here, so it's applicable to anyone. There is also a question about how I became interested in mindfulness and meditation. So when I was a postdoctoral fellow at Hopkins over a decade ago, I took a mindfulness course, the Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction course. And I had never heard of mindfulness. I was working on the burn unit, and we had a protocol, research protocol to bring mindfulness to the patients. And so I took this course, and it was really life-changing for me. I had never thought about living in the present moment. I was always kind of 2 steps ahead or thinking about something in the past. And while that made me very productive, I also really felt like I missed out on living. And so with the mindfulness practices, I was really able to shift my perception on life and be in the moment and notice that there was beauty in each moment, and that while there were challenges, it helped me build a resilience to be with those challenges. And so I never turned back. I started practicing. I started teaching mindfulness classes to patients and started teaching them to faculty and staff, and really value this practice so much and feel like it's a gift that I was given that I like to share with others. Another excellent question: can children practice mindfulness or meditation? Absolutely. I think that these practices should be taught early on, and there is a movement to bring these practices into schools, and it's been it's not necessarily mainstream, but in many schools they are teaching these practices to kids. They're modified a little bit, like, so the breathing practice might focus on, I've heard it taught as breathing in, smelling the flowers, and then blowing out the cookies. So putting it in terms that children can use. There is a organization in Baltimore called the Holistic Life Foundation who that brought mindfulness practices into inner city Baltimore schools. And interestingly, their work is really amazing that they saw the detention rates drop to 0 when they used these practices instead of kind of punitive measures. Someone was asking about the use of the bell. So the bell is basically, I use it as a way for people to know when a meditation is starting and when meditation is ending. We can get into a very relaxed state, sometimes fall asleep. And so I use the bell as a way to just demarcate when the practices begin and end. Someone asked, can you post again your next to last slide, mindfulness hours? Absolutely. I will do that now. Let's see if I can find my presentation. Here it is. Okay. Here we go. Okay. I'll leave that up for a few moments. You can take a picture of it with your phone if you'd like. Someone here asked, what helps most with pain management, also pain during labor? So of course, you know, I'll assume that this is a question related to non-pharmacological treatments. There are, of course, medications that can help with pain. In terms of kind of mindfulness practice, what we know is the courses, such as the mindfulness courses, do really help with pain and with pain management, and they can be used during labor as well. So the issue, the thing with pain is that there is a major psychological component to it, that we tack on stories of how bad it's going to be and how impairing it's going to be, that magnify the distress associated with the pain. And we often try to physically push pain away. And when we try to push things away physically or emotionally, they actually intensify. It's not a long-term, advantage. We don't derive advantage from it. So in mindfulness practices, we're turning towards the pain in small doses, and just recognizing it and noting it. And that experience sometimes over time with practice, doesn't happen right away, but that experience over time allows us to be with the experience of the pain, note it, and then more easily shift our attention to something else when we want to, so that the pain isn't so consuming. So the deep breathing and different practices can be helpful for labor, but also the mindfulness of coming back to this particular moment and kind of, can I be with this experience right now, can help. There is a question if meditation is a type of prayer. Meditation, I wouldn't say is necessarily a type of prayer, but prayer can be meditative. So if we think of when we're praying and sometimes repeating certain phrases over and over, we're bringing our attention to the present moment, and we're bringing it, in this particular case, to a phrase that we're either reciting or mentally noting. So in that regard, we're bringing our attention to some experience of the present moment, and it can overlap with the meditation. Rhonda mentions, I often wait in the car in the Orleans garage for hours while my loved one is in treatment or seeing her doctor. How might I use meditation while waiting for a lengthy period of time? Yes, that's a great question. So how could we use that time in a way to kind of hone these mindfulness skills? So there are a couple of things. If you can, to begin with, take a little walk. If you're able to, that you can take a mindful walk where you might notice something new you haven't seen before, noticing the trees, feeling your feet on the ground. And the reason I say starting with a walk is because often doing some form of movement, even gentle movement, before a mindfulness practice helps us settle in to the practice a little bit easier. It calms the mind a little bit. It also helps us be more alert and awake as opposed to falling asleep. While these practices can really help as a sleep aid if you have trouble sleeping, it's great to listen to them in the evenings. To build that muscle of mindfulness, we do need to be awake to some degree. So doing some form of activity, so maybe beginning with a brisk walk or just some gentle stretching, even just a few deep breaths if you step out of your car. And then I would recommend a guided practice. And it's hard to do some of the mindfulness meditations on our own, but there are many apps and resources and guided meditations. So some popular apps are the Calm app, Headspace, Insight Timer. So the Calm app, Headspace, Insight Timer, UCLA and UCSD, so University of California, Los Angeles, and the University of California, San Diego, both have mindfulness centers that you can Google with free guided meditations. the UCLA one is called the Mindful Awareness Research Center, and they have free guided meditations. And but you can also just Google, meditations, and a variety will come up, and you can try those. So having some form of guided practice, and you sitting for several hours is very, very challenging. So really breaking it up. So you might do a 10-minute practice and then get out again and take a walk. So the formal meditation practice, incorporating them into that period of time. And then informally, if you're going to eat during that time, you can bring mindfulness to eating. You can slow down. You can put your sandwich or fork down between bites and really be with the experience one bite at a time. So we can bring mindfulness to daily activities and formal meditation practice. And both of those things help us really build that muscle to be in the present moment in other facets of our life.
Great, thank you. I have a couple of questions as well, Dr. Gould. For those that are new to this practice, would you suggest, I know you suggested the guided practice, would you suggest almost scheduling some of these moments throughout your day? And does it get easier for folks, or more comfortable, would you say?
Absolutely. So it definitely gets easier. It's, I kind of, related to getting in shape for, a run or something. That at first it's really hard, but that same distance becomes easier the more you practice it. And this is the same thing. We are really building a muscle, and the more you do it, the easier it gets. Along those same lines, there's no good or bad practice. So if you're sitting with an intention to bring your attention to the present moment, then that is a great practice. No matter if your mind is wandering, you note that the mind is wandering. And so there's no wrong way to do this, and you're not supposed to have a particular experience. But you'll notice that with practice, it's easier to bring the mind back to the present moment. In terms of guided practices, yes, I think that is the way to go, to begin with guided practices. And I think it's great to schedule it into your day if you can, and then if it pops up spontaneously and other times when you have time to do it. But scheduling it in your day makes it more of a habit, and that's what we're really looking for. What can I do to make this a habit? So it doesn't have to be an hour a day, but even 5 minutes a day, if it becomes a habit, is really wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing also many of the resources you share. That was one of my thoughts too. Are there other resources that folks can find online? I don't know if you'd recommend any other reading materials besides Full Catastrophe Living. Yeah.
Yes, there's another book that's a little kind of lighter than that. That's a really dense read. Jon Kabat-Zinn is kind of one of the founding fathers of mindfulness, and so anything by him will start laying the foundations. He has a book called Wherever You Go, There You Are, and it's very kind of little chapters that are just a page or two, and so I really like it, with some practice at the end. Another really popular meditation teacher is Tara Brach, B-R-A-C-H, and she runs a meditation community in the Washington, D.C. area called the Insight Meditation Community of Washington, and there are some terrific resources there as well.
You have one more? Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I see a question that says, would you talk about mindfulness guided imagery? Are they the same?
Yes.
Yes. So guided, yes, they're a little bit different. So with guided imagery, we're bringing an image often of a pleasant location to mind and kind of savoring that experience and really immersing ourselves in it. And so almost like recalling a really pleasant memory, and that does elicit positive feelings for many people and is relaxing. It's a little bit different in that mindfulness, we're not kind of conjuring up images, we're allowing images and thoughts to come as they choose to, and so it's not necessarily that we're filtering things into one specific experience like guided imagery, but both can be relaxing and useful tools.
Wonderful. And one last question I think we have time for, is mindfulness-based stress reduction covered by most insurances? I know you mentioned that people could
Yes.
get connected to your program.
Yes, I have been able to, we participate with a large number of insurances, and I have not had any insurances reject the mindfulness based stress reduction billing. It's billed as group psychotherapy, and so I have not had any issues with that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gould, so much for giving your time and insights to our survivors, their caregivers, and friends. And you will now see a listing of our upcoming sessions on your screen. The next ones that we hope you can join us for the rest of the month. And then as well, in early November, we will be sending a feedback survey that will help us plan for future events. So we hope you're able to complete that to give us some great feedback. And as a reminder, Medicare open enrollment begins today, and the Maryland Health Connection open enrollment is beginning November 1st. Please contact us if you have questions or would like additional information and resources to help you make your insurance decisions. We hope you have a wonderful day, and thank you again for joining us.